Chris, welcome. Man, I saw you on somewhere. I saw you, I think, on a in a clubhouse room, and then um, was like, "Oh, I got to talk to that guy." And then, like the next day, I saw something where you had posted, and I don't remember if one of my handles was in the post or not, but it was related, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool." So he's doing that. So we'll talk about that. But tell me, man, how'd you get into this BitClout thing?
Yeah, it's a long story, but let me try to simplify. So I guess currently I'm one of the partners at Race.capital, but before this, I used to work at another venture fund here in the Valley called Greylock Partners. And one of my former colleagues actually, way before BitClout was launched or anything, pinged me and was like, "Hey, have you heard about this BitClout thing?" And I was like, "No, I hadn't." And I did a little bit of research, and I think at the time BitClout, it was like some like mining operation. Like there was like literally nothing else about BitClout. Like it was like pre sort of all that. And so, but then kind of leading up until the first release, I had a handful of other friends also message me about it, including Andy Orts, who I also know outside of through like the venture ecosystem. And I don't know, it just I tend to beta test and try a lot of these new things. So when I've had 4 or 5 or 6 of my friends ping me about it, I'm like, hey, I should just try out what this thing is. And so I wasn't part of the initial user group. They had like a little kind of alpha test, and then they released it, took it offline, and then they took it for like the more general opening. So I was part of that second batch, where I came in fairly early on in its life. And again,
Well,
I mostly just joined as a pure kind of alpha user.
yeah, well, you're definitely OG, at that stage. It's just remarkable to me that I probably came in at 10 or 15 days in. I'm not even sure. Like, what was the date that this thing started?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I was at least a week or two, probably closer to 2 weeks before I heard about it. And I was like, wow, man, I wish I'd have known this a little bit earlier. And I'm sure everybody thinks that. But, now 2 or 3, almost 3 weeks in, I'm like, wow, I guess I'm an OG now, compared to all these people just learning. So, um, and what's it going to look like a year from now? All of us will be OGs. So, but what really captured your attention about it when you jumped on?
Yeah. Again, I tend to beta test and try out a lot of things in this space, both in the crypto space and even outside of it. A lot of things in like the open source ecosystem or enterprise data infrastructure. I don't know. I just tend to be kind of an early user for a lot of this stuff. And at least within the crypto space, there tends to be almost all the products tend to be very financial oriented, whether it's exchanges or dexes or swap related stuff, or you're kind of seeing more NFT related things pop up, but they tend to have a more financial skew to them. BitClout is the only one of the few, if not the only thing that I can think of that is more social oriented. That was just legitimately fun to use in the beginning. And
Well, what made it fun for you? I mean, because I mean, it's gotten better, but man, at first it was clunky.
yeah, the product has always been clunky. It's offline a lot. The transactions stop in the beginning, like the site started and stopped like a bunch of times. But I guess what made it fun is again, there's like been this concept of creator coins for quite a while, but nobody had permeated into a use case that was so readily apparent. And then the other thing is because there was so much mystique and mysteriousness around the launch of it and the creators
Yeah.
behind it and the motivation behind it, there was very quickly this group community ecosystem of people that formed around it and were talking nonstop on Telegram, on Discord, on all these other social channels. And it's kind of crazy to say, like it almost reminds me of Twitter kind of in its earliest days, but the amount of just the sheer amount of people I met, including you and many other people that I've met through this that I would not have met otherwise,
Yeah.
has also just been really, really fun. Like I've gotten to meet other venture investors, other builders, makers, creators. Again, there's like an actual thriving ecosystem around it. So all these things kind of in concatenation with each other. And again, you just don't see this very often in the crypto space. Again, they always tend to be driven towards a particular exchange or DEX or something else.
Yeah.
They tend not to have this like social element to it.
So it's about time we can actually have a little fun with crypto, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel that way sometimes. We profile a lot of stories about crypto, and sometimes I'm like, man, it's just real hard to make this sound sexy or fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, for especially for people who really don't care about it.
Yeah, because especially for a lot of the early participants, because back in the 2013-14 timeframe, we made a handful of investments in the Bitcoin space. I've also just been a kind of a long time participant in that ecosystem. But for the most part, you basically just, the best strategy has been to buy it, hold it, and literally don't think about it.
Yeah.
So there's not much, not that there's not much utility, but like there's not much daily usage of it. In some pockets and some spheres it is, but it definitely has there's a different skew. There's a different audience type of person who's been attracted to the BitClout ecosystem, which tends to, again, just be a little bit different than you've seen in the traditional crypto space so far.
Yeah. So so for instance, your VC, no, I don't want to say VC, well, your fund, I guess, Race.capital, how as a fund have you guys been looking at BitClout?
Yeah, again, for BitClout, I was just an early enthusiastic beta user who probably spent a little bit too much time on this. And I did some research on the Genesis block and a lot of the projects being created on top of it. But really, it's been more of a personal interest of mine. From a fund-wide level, there's like no involvement per se yet.
Yeah. So what are your partners saying? Are they like, hey, come back to the real life?
No, again, I guess it's a little bit more me, my personality type. Like I tend to because again, like Bitcoin back in the 2013-14 timeframe had a lot of the same feeling around it. Ethereum back in the 15-16 timeframe had a lot of the same feeling and sort of characteristics about it. And I don't know, I just tend to find myself in a lot of these weird pockets of the internet, or I don't even know what you call it at this point.
You don't tell your friends and family then, huh?
No, I'm not embarrassed about it. But, I just tend to get weirdly excited about these things. So I think this is one of those things. There is the larger question that I think kind of leads into a lot of the project related stuff is what happens if BitClout actually works? And not works in the short term or onboard new users or whatever, but what if this actually is a dominant social platform in the future? What if BitClout is actually a protocol that tons of stuff is built on top of? It is not it is not obviously clear that is the path it's going to become and go down yet. But there is a larger question of if it does do that, what's kind of all the things, the builders, the makers, the projects, the stuff around it. And that's been the thing I've been kind of more curious about and sort of more personally sort of pulled to over the past few weeks.
So I'm not a builder, and so I don't think that way. Like I didn't immediately look at this and go, oh, this is a blockchain, let's build on it. And you probably come from that world or swim in those, ponds some. I mean, when you look at it, it's like, what could you build on it? What becomes readily apparent to you about that?
I don't know if it wasn't as obvious in the beginning, and it was kind of a big reason why I put together the list in the first place. And I think it also probably stems from, I think most people when they first entered BitClout, they were speculating on who the next celebrity or artist or DJ or basketball player was going to be on this thing. And maybe a big reason why I didn't do a lot of all that is I'm just really bad at a lot of that stuff. I'm not like super into sports. I don't know my celebrities. Like it's just not my thing. And so I can force myself to try to do it, or I can just be true to myself. And the things I really enjoyed were either people in the tech ecosystem, people in the crypto ecosystem, or more importantly, it's the builders and makers and people actually going to do stuff with us. In the early days when this started, practically the only project you can say would be like the BitClout Pulse team. And they did a fantastic job. And I chatted a lot with the founders in the early. It's funny to say in the early days.
Yeah,
Early
2 weeks ago.
It was only 4 or 5 weeks ago. But in the early days, they did a fantastic job of basically reverse engineering the Explorer, sort of building some prototypical APIs around this, doing a lot of the wallet analyzing before a lot of the stuff was readily available. And so at the time, there was really only a project of one. But then slowly, and again, it's funny to say slowly, because over like the next week or so, there was other people who came to this similar realization. And in the beginning, and still really up until this point, most of these things that are being built tend to be more tools or smaller things. So, whether it's like tools for trading or tools for analytics or tools for posting or wallet analyzing or tracking the transactions of other users or seeing where the flows of BitClout are going towards, like what's the kind of newest thing coming up. There's other people doing things around sort of volume analyzing or sort of signal alerting. And this is all kind of to be expected. It's still kind of around this trading use case, I guess, but in this social construct. And then it's all the small tools and techniques in order to sort of improve your BitClout game, for lack of a better phrase. However, you are starting to see the early inclination of some more serious, substantial stuff being built. For example, there's a project that I helped out with in the beginning called BitClout Hunt. Same thing as Product Hunt, but for BitClout, and tracking a lot of the new projects coming out in here. There's other newer things that one just launched yesterday called Moonbounce, which is trying to take your real world clout or your real world activities and pairing that with your BitClout token. So allowing you to do offers, giveaways, videos, private events, private messaging, like actually trying to imbue the creator token with some sort of value. Because right now it's basically just if somebody new signs up, it's, hey, please buy my token, but there's no real there's no real value for it. Like, what do you get from it?
Yeah, that seems to be the talk people. I hear a lot of talk right now. It's just people trying to figure out how can they bring something of value to their token holders and incentivize them in some way. And there's just a whole bunch of ideas going on. And I hear some real lively discussions, almost like brainstorming sessions in some of these clubhouse rooms where they're just going back and forth and coming up with ideas and then talking about, well, we need to start a room just for this, and let's do some counseling sessions and let's spitball some ideas. And it's really fun to listen to because like even for this podcast, I'm like, I haven't even gone into it with the mindset of a monetization. I've left it at this point to I'm just going to see what happens. And so I still haven't wrapped my mind around it, quite honestly.
Two comments. One more specific and one more, I guess, a little bit further afield. So as I was mentioning, there's a lot of things more on like the kind of tool individual trading side, which is all cool and useful. And again, none of this has necessarily been built. But yeah, there's this new emergent category of, I don't even know what to call it, like platform publishing. There's another guy who's trying to build like the Robinhood for BitClout, like an actual full-fledged platform products around this, which again, all these things are ridiculously early days, but if this actually succeeds, BitClout itself isn't going to necessarily build all this stuff. A lot of this is going to fall into the ecosystem. And again, if the whole thing works in terminal value, some of these ecosystem projects can be, end up driving huge amount of value. And to the last, I guess, just broader point, I think this was put into the white paper, but it's hard to fully appreciate. BitClout, the product that you see, the front end, is only the front end, and it's only one version of it. The actual product is basically it's the underlying protocol itself.
Hmm.
And if we know anything from analogy looking at the crypto space, is the protocol, there can be many, many, many things built on top of it, all with very, very different views or very different transaction inputs or very different intentions for it.
All right,
And
so let me stop you right there. Is there this simplistic version that is the Bitcoin-esque blockchain, or is there the more smart contracty Ethereum chain?
That's a good question. I have not, from like a technical engineering perspective, I have not dived in and deconstructed and looked at. There's actually a handful of people I should give shout outs to. There's Ludo, HP Paulson. There's another guy named Zam who have spent a lot more time actually looking into the mechanics of how it's actually constructed. Because I think in the beginning there was a lot of skepticism of, is BitClout even a blockchain? Like, what is actually underneath this thing? And people smarter than I who have looked into it have all come to the conclusion that this is actually a blockchain. It actually is constructed in this form or fashion. It is custom towards the BitClout actions. So all of the accounts, creator tokens, likes, reclouts, all that stuff is actually held inside the accounts inside the system. But the way it's constructed looks closer to Bitcoin, not like Ethereum. There's not necessarily like a smart contract layer necessarily written on top of it,
right.
or at least nothing that's visible within the current block explorer. Also, one thing to keep in mind too, the current block explorer is giving you a particular view on it too. It's also not parsing you through the whole raw hex. So you actually can't, at least at this point, it's hard to deconstruct the full thing. And again, it's fair. Like BitClout itself is still super new. It hasn't even been open source yet. People haven't like really kind of dived into the real foundational technical issues. But in general, at least from smarter people, it's like this thing is actually a blockchain that things can actually really be built up around this.
Right. So then you could conceivably, once they open source it, is it possible that you'll see a lot of layer 2 protocols, not just simply websites being built on this?
Potentially. And you see some early inclination of this, of people trying to do, there's like the BitSwap guys, which are trying to tie BitClout, the native token, into a smart contract on the Ethereum side.
Mm-hmm.
There's another person that I know of who's working on a sort of a wrapped BitClout implementation of this. So how do you actually basically do an ERC20 sort of wrapper around this?
Mm-hmm.
But yes, in theory, you would be able to see many different views of this. You would be able to connect this across the world of other blockchains that we see. There's no theoretical limitation, I guess, per se.
Mm-hmm.
It all stems back to, and to some extent, the BitClout team itself is going to need to do the full approach of open sourcing this, because up until that point, it's very hard to trust or build anything at scale around this. Like you really need this to be out in the domain for people to fully trust it, especially with their private keys. And all that.
That private key thing scares me.
Yeah.
We're already seeing problems with it, with accounts becoming public domain, so to speak, because everybody has the key suddenly, or keys. And I think that's a part where I think, I don't know technically how it could be done, but number one, I think they should have been way more clear about what to do with private keys, like the custody of those and how to manage them and what it means if you don't have this. Because people are just, oh yeah, like, we all go into our new accounts with passwords, go, well, I'm not really going to write that down. I can just always do a forgot password thing. No. And I bet people are doing that. And there's no customer service to call and say, hey, could you give me a new set of keys? Because that's the part that I still, when I hear a lot of people talking about this, I don't hear them talk about the fact that those keys are not just a database that BitClout assigns to you. It's cryptographically generated, so to speak. It's part of the hash of your account,
Yeah.
And people don't, we can't expect people to understand that, but It's a
Yeah.
real thing.
And maybe two comments for this. One, for anybody listening, your private keys are the underlying assets. So if
Yeah.
for whatever reason you are storing that in plain text or you share that with somebody, if I have your private keys, I can't necessarily, I couldn't empty your wallet. That's effectively what it is. So it's not just like a simple password per se. Like it actually carries much more weight.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you lose that, there is no recovery mechanism for it.
Right.
Those keys are owned by you. So
Yeah.
like, you need to ensure the safety of it. So the best practice, at least in the crypto ecosystem, is like you need to write that down physically. Do not store that on a note sharing thing or like on your
Yeah.
desktop or whatever. Like have a safe copy of that. Because again, like the private keys is the asset. It's not just your password. And then the second comment to that is, and again, this is like the interesting nature of it, is the people in the coming from the crypto ecosystem, they're familiar with this, they get this, they've had to deal with this before, they've had to deal with hardware wallets and other stuff. They should have some basic sense on how this is functions and works. But for all the people who are not coming from this ecosystem, the artists, the actors, the musicians, the DJs, man, I could just imagine how confusing a lot of this could really be. And I don't know. I will give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if the original creators of the BitClout ecosystem probably imagined this many non-crypto people would join so quickly, and how much of a support burden that would be. Because there's a lot of these basic questions where this doesn't operate like a Facebook or a Twitter. It's a very different construction on how this thing is built.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think on the whole subject of keys, people will create, let's say that you're a squatter. I'll call you a squatter, that you've created a handle. You will say it's Pepsi. Like, oh, well, Pepsi's not a reserved account, so I'm going to grab Pepsi. Do you really have any real value there? Like, it's not like a domain grab where Pepsi may come to you and say, hey, we want to buy that from you and give you a lot of money. Give us Pepsi.com. In this case, you hold the keys, and those keys don't change, right? Well, I guess I'm thinking through. I suppose you could abandon the name and then they could take it with another set of keys, right? So it's not as if you would hand them the keys and they're always looking over their shoulder saying, I wonder if that, goofball is ever going to come wipe us out.
Yeah, I wrote, I think probably week one or maybe even like day 3 or 4 of when BitClout officially released to the public. I wrote this post on BitClout Pulse that I think it was titled, "Could BitClout names become the next Twitter names or Twitter handles or website domains?"
Yeah.
Again, this is predicated on BitClout working at scale. If it's just a weird esoteric thing between all of us, and it's fun for a little while, but it doesn't ultimately succeed, then it doesn't really matter. But hey, if this becomes a much, much, much larger thing than we all are anticipating, then to some extent it could be. Like websites, I think, are fully appreciated and valued today, but a lot of people don't realize that even Twitter handles, Instagram handles, these things are actually valuable assets. There's actually whole black, gray area markets that are in the business of buying, selling, trading these usernames, and people pay quite a lot of money to reserve those, because again, a lot of this touches your brand and your association, your personality, or if you're a company. And so one of the exercises I did was I looked at all of the, and I can share the post with you. I took all of the most highly valued domain names, and I tried to pull from some of the gray markets the most highly valued user account names across Twitter and Instagram. And I bought a lot of the generic words in the beginning, because
as domains, as .coms or what?
Yeah, in the beginning, a lot of these in the BitClout ecosystem were basically valued at $0. There was no other holders of any of this stuff. And so I took like the most generic, like sadly Chris was taken, but John, Stacy, Kim, Veronica. I'm
Right.
forgetting like all the specific names. I could send you the post. And then in the domain world, there was a lot of specific domains that were highly valued, like hotels.com or
Right.
travel, business, like whatever like those valued were. And then I also took a lot of the kind of more for fun. I took a lot of the generic crypto words as well. So crypto, Gemini, I think Coinbase is reserved, Binance is reserved, but like ETH, ETH, Solana, Serum, FTX. Again, like I have no idea if any of these things will be terminally valued to a greater extent in the future. But at $0, you could actually buy like a decent amount of tokens, even literally for 10, 20, 100 bucks. And it's a long-term asymmetric bet that, hey, if these things are valued as handles or domain names, then the worth of it actually should be worth a lot.
So all right. So let me ask, how would that happen? Let's say you got hotels and hotels.com comes along and say, hey, we want that. And you work out a deal. You're not going to give them the private keys for that. Or are you? Or is it going to be a case of, okay, because you can change your name at any time. So would it be okay, we're going to do a manual atomic swap here where I'm going to change my name and right away you're going to change yours to hotels?
Actually, I have a little bit of insight here, but kind of by accident, and maybe what also spurred like this thought as well. So let me tell you a story, and then I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it ties into this. So when I originally joined BitClout, I did not realize that my Twitter handle was one of the reserved accounts. So my Twitter handle is McCannatron. Chris McCann is a very there's like a million. There's like I don't know if there's a million, but there's a lot of Chris McCanns, and so to get Chris or like my generic name was like super tough, and so I had to pick a sort of a concatenation of my last name. So when I first joined BitClout, I don't have like a top 15,000, Twitter account or whatever. I'm not followed by millions of people. I just assumed my account wasn't reserved, but I was wrong. My account was reserved. I'm not sure why my account was reserved. I don't know why I was in the initial pool, but I had a reserved account for my Twitter handle. But when I first joined, I took Chris McCann because I figured, hey, it was new. Chris was already taken. It was already reserved. So why don't I get my name because this is a new network? So then when I tweeted my public account, I was tweeting Chris McCann, but I was tweeting it from Mechanatron, which I did not realize it was reserved. And so my account for my Twitter handle was verified, sort of very shortly to my surprise. But all of my creator tokens that I bought were associated under @Chris McCann. And so I lost basically access to all this. And this one basically superseded the private key that I had. And so I actually needed help from the admins of the site to fix it because I couldn't fix this on my own. I basically had two usernames associated with one key. And all my creator coins were associated with the one that I did not have access to that I tried, which I was really bummed out about in the beginning. And so the admins or somebody on the site, the admins of the site had to help me transfer one of those accounts over to a new public key that I set up that had zero history attached to it. So my insight going back to your initial question you asked me is, it is possible to transfer usernames over and all the things associated with that username. Right now, my assumption is that ability or that right is only locked up with a handful of people, or maybe only the node holders. I don't exactly know how like consensus works in the back end, but it is possible to do that kind of transaction. And so does this imply or does this mean at some point in time in the future that usernames are transferable? I'm not sure. But the ability to potentially do that is actually there.
Cool. Well, that eases my mind a little bit. I'm not playing that game, but I've wondered about it, and I wonder about things for like entities that are trying to get involved here and like how they custody their keys and work with that, So let's talk about your Genesis research.
Sure. Yeah, in the beginning, before a lot of the project stuff, again, because BitClout is a blockchain, you can go all the way back to the original Genesis account, block 0, basically, and you can look at the instantiation of how BitClout was created. Very similar if you go back to the Bitcoin history and you look at the initial Genesis block, what was written in it, who was involved, Satoshi Nakamoto, who mined the first block. And you can see all this stuff because it's on a blockchain. It's effectively public. You could do the exact same thing on the BitClout blockchain. And when you do that, you notice there's, I'm forgetting the exact number. I'm trying to look right now. There's somewhere on the order of, I think it's like 482 separate public keys that were associated with the Genesis block. Some of these public keys are associated with accounts. Like, let me pull out a few of them. Like, Chamath was part of the initial Genesis block. Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss were. Andy Arts was. Ryan Hoover was.
So they already had their handles associated with that key.
Not only did they have their handles associated with that key, but their initial BitClout holdings and then all of the creator coins they bought from are all part of that same initial account. It was created at the Genesis block, and then you can follow it basically in time afterwards. So some of these are named people that you can go look at. Some of these are pseudo-anonymous names that you can't necessarily match the identity with. Some of these are completely unknown addresses, which hold substantial value, but do not have a username associated with them. And some of these are just complete mysteries that don't have a username nor any holdings or anything associated with that. But it was part of the Genesis block with BitClout token holdings in the account itself. Basically, it's like an unclaimed account, if you will. So again, because it's a blockchain, all of this stuff is public and you can see it.
Right.
And so I tried to, with this other spreadsheet that I did kind of earlier on, I tried to find as much information as I possibly could with these 482 keys in the Genesis block. And this gives you some indication of who was involved, the investors behind it. It implies some of the potential team that was behind it as well. Again, none of this is verified. It's just looking at block data. But that was one of the things I did when BitClout first came out, and probably because I'm terrible at celebrities, this is what I spent my time on.
So were you one of the guys that started uncovering some of the key players or the dev team through that research?
Yeah, although the I guess interesting answer to that is, like, most people associate Diamond Hands or Maybeam or like the Party Hats with a lot of it. All these actually were not in the Genesis block. The three or four most important accounts in there are actually still a little bit of a mystery. One is at Who Am I? The other one is at DA5ID, like David, but with a 5. And then the other two, which most people know about, is one, there was the creator, which this was the initial account that kickstarted everything. And then there was Merlin, who was the initial one who basically gave everybody their initial BitClout holdings.
Right. And
then also for all new users, when you like put in your phone number and got like your like initial BitClout, this is the one distributing all this. So again, all this is associated in the Genesis block that you can see.
Yeah, I think did you write about that on BitClout Pulse?
Yeah, I believe so. I think I wrote.
I think I read some of that.
Yeah, I think I wrote 1 or 2 posts. Again, trying to infer from the Genesis account data who is the potential people around it. And again, some of them are named and easier, and some of them are pseudo-anonymous, and it's kind of a guess.
Has anything emerged after that where you've been validated or maybe found out, oh, I was wrong on this one?
Well, probably the biggest thing is after I posted a few of these things, I noticed a lot of the Genesis block holders bought my token.
Oh. Well, maybe I'll make a few accusations as well then. see if they'll buy any of mine.
which that's interesting. And then again, I'm friends with some of these people involved, like Andy, who initially took like a position on my own token before I like really understood how all this stuff works, who was part of like the Genesis block. Like he's also not confirmed, but showed me sort of the light of like some of these things as well. Again, not all these things are verified. Some of these are more best estimations, best guesses too. And again, it's only looking at like the pure Genesis block. This isn't necessarily the verified truth. So
sure.
yeah.
So, but what about that? If at all solidified in your mind that this is a legit project or not, like with the players involved, because that seems to be one component of people's decision-making process of whether they think this is a scam or not, which usually has to do with, well, how could it be if the Winklevosses are in it? Or
so a lot of the named investors were also part of the Genesis block, and then I also independently verified that yes, they actually did invest to kickstart the network. And
you did your own research and got the validation.
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that?
Again, because I'm like a VC myself living in the Valley, I basically just texted a bunch of people.
Oh, okay. All right. I get it.
This is basically looking at the data and then doing some more qualitative research outside of that. And then if you look at the not investors, but the other people involved or around it, again, this isn't like verified. So like do your own research or whatever. But a lot of the signals from the data, who was involved with this very early on from a team perspective, it was mostly from the AngelList, Product Hunt, CoinList ecosystem, and Republic, which is also a kind of an AngelList spin out or sort of associated with the team. Which again, if you correlate who is involved in the people around it, a lot of that actually makes total sense. Like it's not like completely out of the ordinary, but sort of two signals of one, you have like some named legitimate investors, which is actually true. And again, since then, this was before there was any publicly named investors. So like, again, it was more of a kind of bet on that. But since then, a lot of them have been publicly associated with it. And then in addition to that, the potential sort of team involved behind it and their pedigree and legitimacy.
Yeah.
So at least to me, because again, remember, it's way different now versus in the past. The past being literally 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. But in the way back in the old days, the biggest question was, is this a scam?
Right.
Like, is there anything behind this? Is there a blockchain behind this? In the beginning, BitClout was just taking in Bitcoin contributions and giving you BitClout token, which wasn't really clear on like where the price was derived from. And so the initial skepticism at the time is this basically just like the world's biggest honeypot to steal people's Bitcoin?
Yeah. So what's the word on the street in the Valley, so to speak, where you are? Since you run in the circles of these VC, Silicon Valley VCs, what's the community? What's their read on this among the people that aren't involved in it? Like, what's their take, so to speak, in general? I'm speaking in general terms.
From the, I guess, like perspective of like the Valley or tech as a whole, keep in mind like it's fun and exciting and all this for all of us involved, but BitClout itself is still ridiculously early in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
it's an interesting and intriguing experiment that could lead to potentially to something bigger, and there's an interesting early community of people behind it, but
it's not getting a lot of talk in the Valley. Is that what you're saying?
No, but also keep in mind that most things like this esoteric, when they start off, also have the same skew to it.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's fortuitous that we're talking on the day that Coinbase went public, but when Coinbase pitched their investment pitch after Y Combinator, like literally nobody wanted to talk to them. Gary Tan and a handful of others believed in the story and knew a little bit about Bitcoin and wanted to take an asymmetric bet, but they were not the hot, sexy company that they are now. They didn't have people knocking on the door. The round wasn't oversubscribed. In fact, I think it was reported that initially Coinbase was only trying to raise $1 million post Y Combinator, and they were only able to raise 600K, which, if you know anything about Y Combinator companies, is like literally unheard of. Like every single one of them.
Yeah. Now they take that much in fees every 45 seconds, I think. So.
Exactly. They all oversubscribe like crazy. So these, for lack of a better phrase, these new, weird, challenging things, it's pretty normal for them not to just take off and get to 1 billion users instantly.
Right.
It needs to digest for a while. People need to kind of wrap their head around it. It's too, even for people in the crypto ecosystem, this is like weird stuff. Like it's still out there.
And there's 142,000 and change users, creators right now. And how many real people unique people do you think that is?
I don't have a good sense on that one. I know definitely there's people are opportunistically trying to create fake profiles and scam people and stuff. So you need to take some sort of discount.
Everybody's got at least 2, I bet.
Yeah. So you need to take some discount for that. I don't know. We're probably talking about somewhere in the range between 20 to 50,000 ish people on the creator side, which again, in the grand scheme of things, from a social network perspective, is still ridiculously early.
Yeah.
Like you don't start to get to real scale until post 1 or 10 million daily active users.
Right.
So there's a long road ahead of this thing, which again, to some extent is disappointing, but to some extent is optimistic, because again, the future is all ahead of this thing. Nothing has been set in stone. Nothing has been built yet. All the assumptions can change about this. Like it still has a long time to go.
All right. So before we get too far on our time limit here, we got to talk about this list that you're making. So tell me about it.
Yeah, I think you're probably referencing the list of projects being built on BitClout. So I guess to tie into the previous story, in the beginning there was really only a BitClout Pulse, and they were doing a bunch of good stuff. But I started noticing 1 or 2 of these entrepreneurs started spinning out some of these early tools and early experiments and early projects. And so for myself, I was just curious, very similar to the Genesis block exercise of how many projects are there out there? How many people who's working on this? How many people are working on it? What are they? What categories do they fall into? And so I just started putting a spreadsheet together. I assume there's probably going to be 1, 2, 3 projects, and kind of that would be it. But my assumption was terribly wrong. There was, now I think looking at it, there is over 50, 59, 58 projects. And by the way, these are all, I try, I can't promise it, but I try as best as I can to verify there's a real maker behind this. They're actually building a real thing. There's even a wider thing of people just creating sort of fake projects or whatever. But like, this is like as close as I can summate to like who's actually building some real stuff on this. But yeah, there's a lot more than I would have ever initially thought. And now that I put this spreadsheet together, I literally get 20, 30, 40 messages a day of, hey, you should include my project. Hey, we're building something new.
Yeah, we're looking at it now. And so is there a ranking, or it's like, so when I first looked at this, when I first learned about this, I learned that this podcast is on it. And I was like, oh man, I've made it on the list. But when you add, are you adding new ones at the bottom, or how's it sorted? Is it by market cap or what?
Yeah. Initially, there was no, again, initially I thought this was just going to be like a super small list, and you can just kind of look at it all at once. So there was no sorting. In fact, all the stuff that I have on top, it used to just be on the bottom, because I just assumed it'd basically be one page, and you'd see like, how do you submit, or created by me.
Right.
But very quickly it went above that, and there was a guy that guy, on the third line, Adrian C from Cloudify app, he actually built this little API thing for me to pull in the market cap data. So he made basically a little script that I could just plug into that field, and then on the right, the market cap USD. And then based on the account, it would actually pull in the market cap of that particular project. I think it refreshes on an hourly basis based on the Google spreadsheet itself. Yeah. And so after I had that, I just I did a simple sort by market cap, which gives you a pretty good inclination of the projects that are more serious, I guess, or like have more following or backing behind it, and then the more long tail stuff. So some people just like to look at the top stuff, and they just want to know like the things with like the most following. Some people love to find the new things, the things that haven't been picked over, the things that have just come out. So you can sort it however you want.
So could you add in, now that they've changed it to where it shows you their founders reward percentage? I think they started that yesterday or last night. Could you add a column in there where now you could also show their founder reward?
Yeah, I think so. I probably have to get Adrian to build it because he made like a little custom thing for me. So
yeah, which is cool.
I don't want to put him on the spot, but yeah, I guess any particular data that they had would be easy for me to include it on here. To some extent too, there was the line number 10 BitClout hunt. There was again, like I didn't have the assumption that there was going to be that many projects. So when it became clear that there was more projects than I thought, I found a really interesting one called BitClout Hunt, very similar to Product Hunt in the technology world. They wanted to do this for the BitClout ecosystem. So they want to be the central place which hosts all the projects, features the creators behind it, talk about what they're building, enables a kind of early beta testing. And so and they're actually, it's a real team. They're building a real product. It looks really beautiful and pretty, much prettier than a spreadsheet itself. And so at some point in time, I'm just gonna, this list is gonna be so much to maintain that somebody really needs to focus on this. Like again, this was just a personal.
I was just proud to be on the list, but I feel a little small when I look at BitClout Pulse has a market cap of over $3 million.
Yeah,
that's insane. I mean, for something that's only weeks old.
Yeah, BitClout Pulse was the very first the place that kind of aggregated a lot of this information. They have one of the most active Discord groups behind this. They initially were doing wallet analyzing before anybody else. They were tracking prices before anybody else. The team who goes by the pseudo-anonymous name Automatic and Pseudo, they reverse engineered the Explore and API very, very, very fast. And so like they saw the potential of BitClout being a platform or a protocol, not just a product first. And they really tripled down on that before anybody really thought about this. So like they absolutely deserve to be on top. And they're continuously working on a bunch of new products too that they're coming out with for all the people kind of involved in their groups as well.
Yeah. So you think the developers of BitClout ever envisioned how quickly people would jump on and start developing on this?
Yeah. I've talked to them a handful of times, and them compared to anybody else saw the opportunity this very quickly thereafter. And they were, I guess, didn't just see it, but they also executed the product against that.
No, I'm talking about the developers of BitClout.
If
they imagine, well, if we put this clunky thing out here, people are just going to jump on and start building like crazy, which is apparent already.
Maybe. They're probably working on it, but there isn't as robust as an API around this. Like there really isn't a lot of developer tools. A lot of people have had to kind of build this on their own, which is totally understandable. BitClout has gotten so much more traffic and attention and usage, and they probably had to spend all their time literally just trying to keep the site alive. And then that really should be priority number one. I don't know if I can make a comment on whether they saw this ecosystem spinning up around it, but what is clear, at least to me, is BitClout itself can only do so many of these things, can only internalize so much. And again, if BitClout works at scale, there's going to have to be an ecosystem of other projects and people around this to build all the other tools you would expect. So similar to Ethereum, it's not the Ethereum Foundation that's building the wallets and the trading platforms and the DeFi and the swaps and the NFT marketplaces. There's a whole ecosystem of entrepreneurs doing all this. And again, that's why I think I've shifted a lot of my my own attention and sort of creator holdings to a lot of these things, because again, it's an asymmetric bet that if this works, this will be one of the most important kind of layers of the BitClout ecosystem. It's really early, like not a lot of people, some people, but not a lot of people are thinking about this. And again, my own personal reason is I'm just really terrible at celebrities and whenever I look at anything, I look at it from the developer maker perspective. And so I'm cursed with this.
Hey, that's your niche, man.
So I'm doing what I do best.
Right on, right on. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for joining us and bringing us a developer perspective, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on. If anybody wants to connect with me on BitClout, I'm just at McCannatron, so McCann, McCannatron. I really wish I had Chris, but unfortunately my Twitter account was already reserved. But yeah, feel free to send me a message, ping me anytime.
Definitely. There it is, folks.
There you go.
Right there on screen. Right on. Chris, thank you, man.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot.